Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a few moments. I still have a few people logging on, so let's give it a moment here. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So first off, hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Prepare for ACF Rule Impacts and Save Money on EV Infrastructure. This webinar is co-hosted by ACT News and 3 of California's utilities, Southern California Edison, SCE, Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, and San Diego Gas and Electric, SDG&E. And to get started, my name is Nick Badillo, and I'm a Clean Transportation Policy Manager and self-proclaimed EV nerd with San Diego Gas and Electric, and I will be your moderator today. So during this morning's webinar, we will be diving in head first into the infrastructure planning aspects of the Advanced Clean Fleets Rule, or ACF rule, and why infrastructure planning is one of the first steps fleets should take to ensure a successful path to ACF compliance. And so there's going to be 2 big takeaways from this webinar. The first of which will be understanding how critical it is for fleets to make infrastructure planning a priority to allow sufficient time for infrastructure design and installation that also aligns with ACF compliance milestones. The second is learning how to set fleets up for operational success by taking advantage of infrastructure funding available now through each California utility's respected EV infrastructure program. And so if you have questions about what the ACF rule is, or if the ACF rule will even impact you, we've covered this in detail on 2 previous webinars that are really helpful beginning resources. I've personally gone through them a few different times, and it's really helped. And so we'll be adding a link to both sessions into the chat right now if you'd like to review any of that material. Okay, and we'll move on to our next slide. Okay, before we get started here, just a few things to keep in mind. Slides from today's webinar will be available and sent to all registrants following the webinar. As I mentioned earlier, we are dedicating as much time as possible today for a live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So please submit any questions you have using the Q&A box located in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and please be sure to direct all questions to the organizer. At the end of the webinar, before closing your browser, we kindly ask you to complete our 30-second survey. Please use this opportunity to let us know what topics you'd like to see discussed in future webinars, and a recording of this webinar will be sent out next week to the email address you used to register. This recording will also be available on the ACT News website. And lastly, for any technical issues and assistance during the webinar, please email G&A Marketing using the email address you see on the screen. And we will also drop that chat into the little chat function, and we'll quickly assist you with any issues you may have. Okay. And now, let's get to it. So we have a great lineup of speakers that will be going into much more detail today. Our first speaker, Rebecca Schenker, is Senior Director of Programs at G&A, and she will walk you through the ACF rule as it relates to the infrastructure to help you better understand the complexities of the rule that applies to many fleets operating in California. Rebecca will also share the first step you need to take now to ensure your pathway to zero-emission vehicle aligns with the infrastructure timelines of your local utility provider. Next, we'll be hearing from our co-sponsoring utilities, Dean Kanesh, Electric Vehicle Onboarding at Pacific Gas and Electric, and Jason Groves, Business Development Advisor, Transportation Electrification at Southern California Edison. Each utility company, SCE, PG&E, and SDG&E all have programs in place that can help you take advantage of today, specifically designed to provide fleets like yours with free resources, support, and most importantly, funding and incentives to offset your EV infrastructure costs. I think it's also important to note that EV infrastructure programs at each utility are not exactly identical and may have a few differences. So it's important to connect with your utility and confirm eligibility along with program requirements. So first up, I'm going to turn it over to Rebecca. And Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nick. I'm going to start with a brief overview of the ACF rule, but really focused on just kind of high-level talking points. There are people on this webinar who probably know a lot about ACF. There are folks who know they need to know more. We have links in the chat to previous webinars in this series that maybe dive a little bit deeper into individual aspects here. So please feel free to refer back to those or any other resources at the CARB website, and then ask questions in the Q&A if we don't get to the overview here. High level, who needs to comply with ACF? Most folks who interact with transportation in California are going to have to think about ACF moving forward. Specifically regulated are most private fleets, any drayage vehicles, and all government fleets, as well as any companies that contract or broker with third-party fleets. This is pushing a transition to 100% zero emission for all vehicles that are Class 2B, 8501 GVWR and above, plus off-road yard tractors and light-duty package delivery vehicles if that is your primary operation. We are going to have compliance dates starting as soon as December 31st of this year through 2042. And we'll go to the next slide to look a little bit more at how this will play out for each group. So for those of you who fall into the high priority and federal fleet category, who is that? It is any federal agency that operates at least one vehicle in California, and then 50. Any entity with 50 million in revenue nationwide and at least one vehicle in California, any entity that controls, owns, operates at least 50 vehicles nationwide, and has one vehicle in California. Next slide. If you are a high priority private or federal fleet, you have two options for compliance. Your first choice is the ZEV Edition option. This is the default pathway. It is what you will have to do unless you select something differently in the trucker's system. Your options mean that as of January 1st, 2024, yes, less than 3 months from now, every vehicle added into your fleet must be a ZEV. You can only add ZEV into your fleet moving forward. You are then going to have to retire vehicles when they hit the end of their California defined useful life. So once your vehicle is 12 years old, check that engine. It might be 13 engine model years old. And as soon as that happens, you really need to be monitoring your mileage, because as soon as it is 13 engine model years and at least 800,000 miles, it is eligible to be required for retirement. And that replacement would have to be a zero emission vehicle. Your other option is the ZEV percentage option. This gives you a little bit more flexibility. You can continue to add diesel and natural gas and gasoline vehicles into your fleet. But what you need to do is hit these targets. Percentages of your fleet need to be zero emission by January 1st of the dates below. So what does that mean? That means that folks who have any vans, box trucks, yard tractors, or two-axle buses really need to be paying attention to January 1st, 2025. So if you have 100 of that type of vehicle, 10 vehicles across your entire fleet, doesn't need to be your vans and box trucks, but 10 vehicles by January 1st, 2025 need to be zero emission. So you could do pickup trucks, you could do day cabs, but you really need to be focused on that first target, which is really quickly approaching. And thinking about the fact that it is just a year and 2.5 months away, there are some deadlines you need to pay attention to for the end of this year. We'll get into those soon. Next slide. If you have any drayage vehicles, these are vehicles, not fleets. These vehicles need to be, if they go into ports or rail yards in the state of California, all of these vehicles need to transition to full zero by 2035. And any new vehicles added into drayage operations as of January 1st next year need to be zero. So I want to make sure that we really understand this. This is one of the biggest deadlines coming up. So next slide. By the end of this year, within the next 2.5 months, you need to register all of your internal combustion engines in drayage operations into the trucker system, specifically as drayage day cabs or drayage sleeper cabs. If that does not happen by December 31st, those vehicles are no longer going to be eligible to enter ports or rail yards legally in California. Because as of January 1st, 2024, only new zero-emission trucks can be added into truckers, and truckers will be the default system for all of the ports to check against and all of the rail yards to check against to allow entry. As of that point in time, you cannot buy a drayage vehicle from somebody else, even if it is already been in drayage operations. You can't transfer owners, and you need to maintain access to ports and rail yards by making sure you continue to have at least one visit a year. As of January 2025, there will start to be retirement requirements as soon as you kind of hit that end of useful life timeline again. And everything will need to be zero by the beginning of 2035. Next slide. If you are a public fleet, not federal, but all other public fleets operating in California, your compliance pathway is purchasing zero-emission vehicles. 50% of all of your RFP purchases from 24 through 26 are going to have to be ZEV. If you already have some zero-emission vehicles in your fleet, some of that can count towards your 50%, but then we'll have to be 100% of purchases from 2027 and beyond. If you're an exceptionally small public fleet, you may be able to push those deadlines back, but check. Also for ZEV, you have the option to opt in to the high priority milestone option as an alternative to this. You can opt in until January 1st, 2030, but you can't switch back and forth. Next slide. Everyone as well, and this is public fleets, this is private fleets, this is brokers, this is anybody who contracts for transportation, operations, or support. You need to verify that everyone you hire or work with is compliant with ACF. Now, not everyone may need to be compliant. If you're a very small fleet, ACF may not apply for you, but you do need to do the work to actively verify that each fleet you work with is compliant and you are allowed to do business with them. And there is exposure from kind of a fines and liability perspective if you're not doing this active verification. So just wanted to really make sure everyone understands that as well. Next slide. Okay, so one of the biggest questions I get from folks is, what are the exemptions that I can take advantage of for ACF? And I really want to start by reframing this. There aren't a lot of outright exemptions. There are flexibility provisions written into the rules. So thinking of them as more delays and exceptions if you meet all of the requirements if you're already meeting your requirements for ACF, CARB is going to give you flexibility. If you're not, then you're not eligible for a lot of these. And so I think instead of thinking about how you might not have to comply or how you can get around things, it's really, really important to think about how you're going to get to yes. And if you run into problems, and my guess is a lot of us will, if you run into problems and you've been doing your best, putting your best faith effort forward and documenting that process, CARB is going to be a whole lot more willing to work with you. And in terms of the actual exceptions and delays, this list is out there. Folks have covered it in more detail. Again, you can refer back to some of our previous webinars for more details on each of these. But we're really going to focus in today on the infrastructure aspects and the infrastructure specific delays. These apply across the board for each of the pathways under the ACF rules. So if you're doing model year, milestone, drayage, or government compliance pathways, you have access to allowable delays under this rule if you are putting in the work. So we're going to focus a little bit more on the details of those delays and then what that looks like in a project development, thinking about it as you're applying it to your project development plan. Next slide. So for the construction delay, this is the delay that's allowable if you have already begun construction. And so that takes time to get to a construction starting point. This means you need to be working now, yesterday, a while ago, but if you haven't started until now, today is the best day to get started. If you experience delays after your construction start date, the ZEV infrastructure equipment that you've ordered has a manufacturing delay, you have labor issues, there are issues with the particular site, then those sorts of delays are allowable to get this extension. To qualify, you do need to demonstrate that you have been doing your due diligence. You need actual executed vehicle purchase orders, and you need those a year before your compliance deadline. You need to prove the construction began a year before your compliance deadline. And for that, there's kind of different aspects. The rule itself notes a construction permit. The most recent FAQs from CARB don't say you definitely need the construction permit. We're trying to find more about that, but they do say you need executed contracts for infrastructure installation, pushing the work to begin a year before the deadline. And you also need third-party documentation that this delay is real and why it's happened. And if this delay is approved, it's up to 2 years, and you're able to either count a vehicle in your fleet temporarily as a ZEV and potentially delay the removal of that vehicle depending on the pathway you're on. Next slide. The other allowable delay is if you have issues getting power to your site. So if there is not available power due to your local utility not having the power at that specific location, you can get a 3-year delay with a potential 2-year extension for those locations where you do not have enough power. But you still need to pursue as much power and as many projects as possible. So let's say you have a site and you've identified you need 5 megawatts worth of power to charge all of your vehicles. If you have 1 megawatt of availability, you do need to pursue 1 megawatt's worth of project development as quickly as possible. Any delays would then fall under the construction timelines for that. In order to qualify for this delay, there's some really great public resources, maps from each of the IOUs right now that show kind of general information about power availability at particular sites and transmission, but that is not formal documentation. You cannot take a screenshot of that and send it to CARB and say, see, not enough power, I don't have to do anything. No, you have to really work with your utilities, and everybody here is ready and able to partner with you on this. And so you need to work with the utility to understand how much power is available. You need a contract to show, hey, even though this power isn't available now, we are doing ACF, we are pursuing this project, we are working with you. And you need to identify what you can do now and your plans and timelines for what you have to do in the future. Next slide. So thinking about this, going back to kind of the earliest deadlines really are group 1 under the milestone path would be 10% of your group 1 targets need to be 0 by the beginning of January 1, 2025. If that's the case and you have a big order and you don't have things underway, now is the time to make that happen. And that is because by December 31st of this year, you need documentation showing that you are doing your best effort to be compliant with ACF. That means that you need vehicle purchase orders to meet that January 1st, 2025 target by the end of this year. You also need documentation on infrastructure progress. The permit or contracts to support the required infrastructure if there's already power, and vehicle purchase orders. And for site electrification, you're going to need that utility documentation to show that the power just isn't available and that the project is going to move forward along the timelines of power availability. Next slide. Next slide, please. So those timelines are not necessarily going to be easy, but what I can say is that they are building this infrastructure is technically feasible and necessary for the future of California. We need to get to 0. We need to get to 0 for climate and for the health of all of our communities. And we all know it can be done. What we don't know exactly yet are the timelines that'll really work. What I can tell you is if you don't make any steps towards those timelines, you're never going to meet your ACF targets. If you don't make any steps towards those timelines, you're not going to be compliant with this rule. If you do start to make steps, even if you don't get as far as you need to get by the time these deadlines are written into the rule, CARB will be more flexible with you than if you don't. This is our goal, and the folks on this call are here to work in partnership with you to make it happen. This is our future, and those steps start now. So let's figure out what we can do instead of what we can't do. And I think it starts with, what are the actionable steps you can take as soon as you leave the call today? Next slide. First thing is to work with the right teams to learn what your energy needs are, your current operations, what's under all of the rocks, who at your site do you need to be working with. What fleet sites do you own? Which ones are leased? I mean, wherever you own, it's going to be easier to move forward with project development. Where do you have leases that are potentially long-term leases and where the owners are open to doing infrastructure projects? At some point, we assume that most real estate owners who have these kind of commercial operations are going to be moving and integrating zero, because otherwise they won't be competitive in the marketplace. They may not be there yet, but you may have one of those site owners. What is your internal budget process? That's something that you need to figure out now. Who's the team? It's not just fleet, it's facilities, it's real estate, it's leadership, it's procurement. Who needs to be part of this plan? The next one is seemingly easy, but takes more time than you would think. Who has the current utility bills? Whose name is on it? How much power is being used? Can you get that information? Those current utility bills have a lot of great information to get started with infrastructure projects. You have a utility rep probably already who's helping you with business aspects, commercial reps. They're on that bill. You're going to be able to learn about your past and current use, what's there without EVs. All of that is necessary to get these projects started, and it is a really great first step. What else can you do? The fleet team really can be identifying what your potential future energy load will be and the timeline. So pulling that telematics data, pulling that charging, fueling window information, looking at this not just as the first 10% of your fleet, but what is this going to look like at scale with your vehicles? Knowing CARB is going zero across the board. Include your reefers, include your forklifts, your off-road equipment. What does your energy use look like on site, and where does it make sense to pursue these projects first? Next slide. So the next step is the active utility engagement, and this is where you start to develop some of the documentation that you can use to show CARB, like, I'm doing the work. This is real, we are complying with ACF. You need to submit utility capacity evaluation forms to your utilities to understand what the power really is on site. And utilities you can't control what other people give to you, but you can control when you submit. So then when the utilities do give you information back on the utility power availability, you have that documentation for CARB. From there, you can start to figure out which sites make the most sense for your near-term ACF and middle-term, long-term ACF targets based on the sites and power availability. And then you can sign contracts. And each of those are important documentation for CARB. Next step. Now comes the actual project development. You're going to need third-party support unless you actually happen to be a construction or engineering firm already with a fleet that needs to comply. Get that hiring underway. Hiring and contracts are really great documentation that you are doing the work. Again, you can control when you file permits. You can't control when the authority having jurisdiction gets those permits back to you. Having that receipt helps. You're on your way to ACF. Next step. Once you have the information on all of the power availability, on the construction timelines, etc., you're going to be able to actually put together an ACF real world ACF plan. What does your vehicle purchasing look like with all of this energy information available to you? For sites with full or even partial power availability, you're going to have to proceed as quickly as possible with project development. You want to document new orders, you want to document progress, you want everything at least a year prior to the deadline, and that doesn't happen if you start, unfortunately, in October. You do need to start far earlier to be able to get that, year ahead progress. For sites that have power upgrade, this is going to be a process. And I don't know if CARB knows what this process is going to look like. We're all learning this together. This is going to be coordination with the utility on timelines, with your infrastructure, with your vehicles, and with CARB to really say, okay, this is when we expect real world orders to take place based on the process of this infrastructure. Next step. So kind of high level, ACF is here, and it doesn't need to be as scary as I think we're all feeling by this pressure of what are these deadlines. We have partners, we have resources, you have actionable steps you can take. First step is to talk to your utility reps and to partner on this and on funding and other technical resources to make this happen. Who's the team internally you need to be working with? How do you determine your internal resources and your ACF requirements? Work with your OEMs. A lot of them have vehicle, and with your leasing providers as well, they have vehicle and technical resources on all of this. Work on hiring the right partners and map out a plan that's really covering the next 3 years. This is not about your 2025 deadline. This is 3 years from now. You need to be working towards that plan today. And you need to be documenting everything to show CARB, like, we're on board, we're getting to zero. And from there, I am going to turn this back over to Nick.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was super insightful. So next, I'd like to hand it off to Dean Kanesh, Electric Vehicle Onboarding at PG&E. Dean, will you take it from here?
Thank you. Rebecca, thank you so much for that guidance and for those planning steps. I believe if everyone follows the steps that you outlined, they will be successful in electrifying their fleet, including PG&E. We are electrifying our fleet also, folks. So let me talk to you about what are the resources available. From PG&E, we've got 3 main resources for you. We have an infrastructure program that I'm going to go over with you. We have a new electric rate, which lowers the cost of charging an electric vehicle. And we actually have a tool for our fleet operators to transition their fleet from an ICE fleet to a zero-emission battery electric fleet. So first up is our EV fleet program. This is our infrastructure program. San Diego Gas and Electric and Southern California Edison, they also have a program very similar to the PG&E program that I'm going to show you here. So let me start off with some good news. Everyone likes to hear good news. So our program originally launched in 2020 and was supposed to run through 2024. The good news is because things were a bit slow for customers getting vehicles due to the chip shortage and COVID, we asked for an extension to our program. So this date over here on the left-hand side will soon be changing to 2026. We will continue taking applications for the EV fleet program through the middle of 2026. Okay, next slide, please. So when it comes to what are the vehicles that qualify for this program, this is a medium, heavy duty, and off-road vehicle program. That means no passenger cars, no light duty passenger cars, and no golf carts. But for medium duty, we use the old definition of above 6,000 pounds gross vehicle weight rating. So customers may say, well, what does that mean to me? What does that mean to my fleet? Well, if you're talking about electric pickups, F-150, Chevy Silverado, Tesla Cybertruck, all those, Rivian, they all qualify for this program, okay? But there's no passenger cars in this program. And we go very large. We have locomotives, we have ships in our program, a lot of different vehicle types, but no passenger cars. And then for the off-road segment, we can even support electrifying your reefer trailers, your TRUs. tractors, construction equipment, lots of different options available in this program, but no golf carts and no passenger cars, okay? Next. Now, when it comes to the infrastructure, there's the things that PG&E is going to do, and there's the things that you're going to do. So in the green, this is called to the meter. These are the things that PG&E owns. These are our assets, the poles, the wires, the transformers, the service line going up to your switchgear. The switchgear, the conduit, the wires, and the chargers are going to be your responsibility, okay? But we're going to help you with that. So think about the electrical panel on the side of your home. Your utility probably didn't put that panel on your home. Your home builder did. Same thing with the wires in your wall. Same thing applies for EV charging here, okay? Next. Now, here's the good news that goes with that information I just told you as far as who's doing what. So everyone that participates in the EV fleet program gets free utility connection into the grid. Free, free, free. That's the part in green, right? That service line going all the way up to your switchgear. For your switchgear and your behind the meter infrastructure, we pay you an incentive based on vehicle type and quantity. And that's in that table on the right hand side in blue, right? So you can calculate in advance what the vehicle incentive should be for your project. We want your 5-year plan, 5 years. Tell us from 2023 to 2027. And very shortly in the next few months, it's going to be from 2024 to 2028. Give us your 5-year plan for electrifying your fleet, right? And apply it to that table. And that tells you what kind of money PG&E is going to put on the table for you. In addition, we have charger rebates. They're very attractive. Schools and transit agencies automatically qualify under this program for charger rebates. They just must pick out a charger on our approved product list. We actually team up with Jason's team, Southern California Edison. We use a SCE list for the PG&E program here. Now, what if you're not a school or transit agency? If you're in a disadvantaged community and not a Fortune 1000 company, you can also qualify for charger rebates. Same thing applies. You need to pick out a charger on the approved product list. Okay, next. Now, with this good news, there's a couple strings attached. This funding for the program comes from the state of California, our ratepayers. So to participate in the EV fleet program with PG&E, you have to commit to 2 or more vehicles over 5 years. Okay. Second item is we collect data for the state of California. They use this data to evaluate our program and to determine, do they want to fund future programs, right? So when we asked for a 2-year extension, our regulators went through and evaluated our program. They looked at the data and they said, you're doing a good job, PG&E. Yeah, you can have a 2-year extension. And that's what we're using the information for, okay? Third item on this screen here, it's a 10-year agreement for participation in the EV fleet program. We operate under our own contract, our own paper. And what it means is that you're committing to operate these vehicles for at least 10 years. Same thing with the chargers. If you need to change them out at any time, not a problem. We anticipate that. Just change them out like for like, right? So if you got dump trucks, don't say I'm going to replace the dump trucks on year 5 with a pickup instead, right? Because we paid you an incentive based on a dump truck, probably a Class 8 vehicle, and now you're replacing it with a pickup truck. There's a different incentive amount, okay? Just like for like, okay? Next. Now, this slide looks a little scary. This is how you prepare to apply to the EV fleet program. Essentially, we need 3 things from you. What is your vehicle deployment plan? 5 years, right? Same thing for the chargers, and we need the data sheet for the chargers, right? So we can do our load calculations, because it's not only what power it puts in the vehicle, but the chargers need power just to operate themselves. So we need the data sheet for that. And the third item is a map. Google Earth snapshot, draw a circle on it. It's so easy. We try to make it so easy for you. But we do need those 3 items for you to apply to the EV fleet program, okay? Next. Here's our process from start to finish. This process used to say 9 to 13 months, and I'll tell you what, it's taken longer than that. And what's causing the delay is not so much the utility, PG&E, it's switchgear. Customers are telling us 50 to 72 weeks to get switchgear, okay? So this process is going to take at least 12 months, maybe go into 24 months from start to finish. It starts off with the online application, step 1. It only takes about 15 minutes. Step 2, I check it for completeness. Step 3, we're going to do a desktop review to see what facilities PG&E has on the ground, and we're going to send your load to the local grid planner to get approval and move forward. Step 4 is a phone screening and a site walk. And in step 5, we're going to produce a preliminary design, and we're going to price out your project. And in step 6, if you meet our cost thresholds, myself or another onboarding specialist at PG&E will have the pleasure of offering you a contract when it's fully executed by both parties. You sign it first, and PG&E countersigns. In step 7, we will assign you a PG&E project manager to help with construction. So go through the typical steps of construction. You're going to put in your infrastructure first and put in your switchgear per the preliminary design that everyone agreed to. And then we'll roll out the big blue PG&E trucks and we'll get you connected to the grid. It'll take us about a week or 2. And at the very end, we energize your project. You send us your paid invoices, we cut you a check, okay? Next. Here's the second piece of good news. We have a new electric rate for you that does away with all those demand charges. No one likes demand charges. We replace demand charges with a subscription, like a cell phone data plan, right? So you tell PG&E how much power you need, and that becomes your monthly subscription. You can change it at any time by just picking up the phone and calling PG&E, saying, hey, this is my account, I want to change my subscription. That easy. There is a time of use rate, so during the daytime, it's nice and low, but from 4 to 9, that's our peak, so we don't want you to charge, so we raise the rate during that period of time. But after 9 o'clock at night, it drops back down again. This is the equivalent of $2.33 per e-gallon if you're on this rate. So this is a money saver. It will save you at least 25% compared to any other PG&E rate. Next. Last item, but a very popular item, is our EV fleet savings calculator. We have over 12,000 people logging into this tool, and they're not just PG&E customers. There are people in New York, in Iowa, and Hawaii. The URL's down at the bottom, fleets.pge.com. Take it for a ride. No password required. It helps with planning your charging infrastructure. It shows you what grants are available. We update that list about once a month. Shows you what vehicles are available now, coming soon. Calculates fuel savings, total cost of ownership. It'll do a rate comparison for you. And it'll even show you what kind of funding you can get from CARB for the low carbon fuel standard program. Next. Here's an example. You guys will get a copy of these slides. So you just plug in your vehicles, the vehicle type and quantity, pick out your charging system. The tool will help you with selecting the charger so you don't get something too small, and it'll start doing the calculations for you. Next. Here's an example of the cost of electricity, subscription, kWh, for the vehicles selected. Next. And here's the module for LCFS credits. As you can see, it can be very attractive for going to zero emission vehicles. So this will predict what type of check CARB will write to you. You still have to apply to CARB to participate in their program. Next. Here's a comparison of an ICE fleet versus a battery electric fleet, including the charging infrastructure, so total cost of ownership here. So you can make a nice argument with your management for transitioning your fleet maybe a little bit sooner than the ACF rule. Okay, next. Rate comparison, brand new module we added last year. Very helpful for customers to say, well, am I on the best rate? Should I stay on my existing rate for charging my EVs? Should I go on the business EV rate? So now you can take care of that yourself online at your own convenience. Next. And here's a list of helpful resources. You can see all kinds of information to help you with transitioning your fleet. And Nick, that's it for me. Back to you, or let's see. I think you're going to introduce Jason, right?
Correct. Thank you so much, Dean. I also really appreciated you distinguishing between what constitutes a light duty vehicle versus medium and heavy duty. That seems to be a reoccurring theme when we do connect with customers. We have a lot who just use the term fleet interchangeably, but thank you once again. So we'll move on to our next presenter, Jason. Jason is a business development advisor, transportation electrification at SCE. Jason, I'll let you take it from here. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you, Dean, for that really helpful presentation. I'm going to talk a little bit more, sort of add to what Dean had to say about what utility resources are available on the infrastructure side for these EV build-outs. Next slide, please. All right, so first, just a little bit, I guess it's professional advice on kind of working with a utility and the most important things to cover early. And that is really just communicate early and often with us. So the first thing I would say is we often speak to customers and they want to wait until they have a PO for vehicles to begin speaking to us. And I would say, don't wait for that. As soon as you have determined that electrifying your fleet is something that you need to do, reach out to us right away. We'd love to have a conversation with you. We want to know, where you're thinking you might electrify and what the scope of that looks like. And then, by having those early conversations, we can hopefully help you to identify the best path for you so you can start this infrastructure journey. And when we're talking about the pathways that are available to you within Southern California Edison, there's really three primary pathways. So the first one is the Charge Ready Transport program. And this is similar to the program Dean had been speaking about with PG&E, in that this is the program that will typically be able to pay for the majority of your infrastructure build out. So this would really be the ideal, right? If you can utilize this one, go with it first, because we have a good amount of funding in there to help with these build outs. But there's other options if you decide that's not right. So there's also a Rule 29 project, and that one can cover the infrastructure upgrades that are necessary on Edison's side of your meter, things like potentially upgrading a transformer if necessary. But with the Rule 29, the customer is still responsible for upgrades on their side of the meter at their facility. A lot of customers do go this route though, because it can be a little bit quicker than the Charge Ready Transport program, but it just doesn't pay for as much. And then finally, if you're deciding it's not right for you to utilize either of those programs, you can obviously still request new service at your site for your EV deployment, just going through our local planning department, which is I guess I would say the normal way most customers in the past would go about requesting service from their utility. Next slide, please. All right, so I just want to touch a little bit on a couple of programs that we offer that are kind of outside of that hard infrastructure that Dean had been speaking about and what we provide within our Charge Ready Transport program. We do have these two services. One of them, we put them under the umbrella of Transportation Electrification Advisory Services. And one of them is called the EV Readiness Study. And this is intended for Edison customers that at the very early stages of vehicle electrification. And it helps to give them a very high level study of their site and can get them to start thinking about what they need to consider in terms of funding resources and charging stations and things like that. And then we have another program which is slightly newer called Grant Writing Assistance. And this is meant to help fleets write grant requests for vehicle funding, because the programs through the utilities, at least through Edison, they don't directly help to fund the vehicles themselves, but there's a lot of grant money out there through third parties being offered to purchase these EVs. And we realize that most organizations do not have grant writers on staff full time. So this is something that we can offer to our customers, where we can help you to write that grant request to go after that vehicle funding. Next, please. Okay, let's talk about next steps and how you would think about beginning one of these projects. So The first thing is to identify the sites that you plan to electrify and which of the utilities are covering those sites. All three of California's investor-owned utilities have options to help you fund these projects. So Dean spoke about PG&E's program. Southern California Edison has charge-ready transport, and SDG&E also has a similar program. So reach out to your respective utility about potentially getting started with one of these, or if you have sites in multiple utility territories, reach out to several utilities. And as you're doing this, you know, the items below are really important in terms of what should you begin considering as you are looking at entering one of these programs. And these are really the big things that we would need to kind of get you started. The first one is the number and the type of vehicles that you plan to deploy at your particular site. Really important because, you know, the number of vehicles and how large they are impacts the overall power requirements to get them charged. We also want to know what are your long-term vehicle deployment plans at the site, because with these programs, we can often build out infrastructure early to accommodate vehicles that might be arriving, you know, 4, 5, 6 years in the future. And so for these projects, it's obviously better if you know what your deployment plans look like out into the future. It's better to build that infrastructure in one go, if possible, rather than breaking it out into multiple projects. So think about future deployment if possible. Think about where does it make sense to charge the vehicles at your facilities. So, and we're going to need to know that if you apply to one of these programs. And, you know, this is not a complex, you know, engineering drawing that you need to hire someone to do. This is really as simple as walking around your site and thinking about, from your operational standpoint, what makes sense, and then just drawing a line on a Google map. At the early stages, that's really what we want to know. And then if you have multiple depots or locations within the area, and I realize this won't be possible for everyone, but I'm going to throw it out there. Consider consolidating your EV deployment at a single site if possible. That's one way to reduce costs. So, you know, you can look at potentially building out infrastructure at one site instead of 4. And then that can potentially be more affordable, although we understand that for many of you, you will need to build out in multiple sites across your territory, and we will absolutely work with you on that. Next slide, please. Okay, and just a few other resources, actual links you can go to get you started. The first one is our Dr. Pep Power Site Search Tool, and this will just give you a very high-level overview of the power that might be available at your site. Super useful. I do want to give you the disclaimer that that is not the end-all be-all. It's just to give you a high-level idea. It will not show you power that might be reserved for future customers. So, you know, we will need, in order to do a thorough assessment, you would need to apply to one of our programs, and then we can, you know, give you the for sure, this is what we can provide, but that's great to get you started. For charge-ready transport, I've included the link to an interest form if you want to learn more about it. If you're interested in our Rule 29 program, which can cover upgrades on Edison side of the meter, feel free to reach out to that email that will go directly to an inbox at Edison for Rule 29 projects. And then if you're interested in putting in a new service request with local planning, I've also included a link below for you. And next slide, please. I believe that's the last one. Yes, and there's my direct email. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email, and would love to help you. Back over to you, Nick.
Thank you so much. So first off, thank you to Rebecca, Dean, and Jason for taking the time to present. Jason, I really appreciate you providing next steps for beginning or kicking off your project. There seems to be quite a lot of information out there, and it can be rather complex to digest or even get started. And so I think it's also important to note that SDG&E also has a very similar infrastructure program referred to as the Power Your Drive for Fleets program. In the interest of time, we did not go through the fleets program as a lot of the content is duplicative and was already covered by Dean and Jason. So if you're located within SDG&E service territory, we'd be happy to connect you with a member of our team and further discuss future electrification plans. So for all service territories, it's also important to note that the utilities are here to support you, and it really is worth having that conversation with an experienced member of the team and identifying next steps. So as a follow-up to this webinar as well, we will be sending out contact information. The slides will also be available and sent to all webinar registrants. We will also be dropping in contact information for each utility representative into the webinar chat and sharing that on screen so that you'll have all the resources you need to connect with your utility today. So we're going to move on to the next portion of this webinar, and we're going to get started with the live question and answer now. We'll be answering questions that you've submitted throughout the webinar, and don't stop. So please feel free to submit your questions, and we're going to try to get through as many as we possibly can. So to go ahead and get started, our very first question, I'm going to direct this one to Jason at SCE. Can you tell us more about future projections of tariffs for MVH2 charging, and can you discuss the current demand charge holiday and the rate escalation?
Yeah, so part of these projects, we do put in a separate meter, which is specific for these fleet vehicles. And one of the really great things is that we have this demand charge holiday. So we've actually recently extended it, and I think Dean might have mentioned PG&E's version earlier, to 2026, which means that for these rate tariffs, there are no demand charges on them until 2026. And then from 2026 to 2031, it's a steeply discounted rate. So in the first year that it kicks in, you'll be paying about 16 to 17% of whatever the market rate is. And then it will go up by that much every year until you reach 2031, at which point you will be paying whatever the market rate is. And that is designed to give fleets plenty of time to adapt to how they're charging their fleet so that they can do it in the most efficient way possible, and they're not just getting hit with a big demand charge in the beginning. I also want to mention about the rates themselves. I don't have a crystal ball. I can't tell you, this is what the rate is going to be in the future, because that's decided in part by the California Utilities Commission. But I can tell you that this holiday for demand charges, it's a great thing to take advantage of, and just kind of ease your transition into this.
Perfect. Thank you. Dean, did you want to add any additional commentary to that for PG&E?
Well, our electric rate, we don't anticipate having demand charges in the future. Ours is purely subscription based. Ours is just a normal tariff. Do rates change? Absolutely, they change all the time. We're doing our very best to try to keep our business EV rate as low as possible to help customers transition their fleet over to battery electric.
Perfect. And I think the only, thank you for that. The only additional commentary I have for SDG&E, I think what's really awesome, as you go throughout this process to go ahead and electrify your site, we do complete a rate analysis. So there are projections based upon what you can potentially spend in terms of operating these vehicles and where you can maximize cost savings. So definitely worth having that conversation. Thank you both. And on to our next question. This is a really awesome one, as especially in SDG&E service territory, along with additional parts of the state. There's a lot of vehicles that travel in between different states or even bi-nationally. So Rebecca, this question is for you. Can you please tell us about fleets outside of California that deliver goods into the state and how ACF impacts it?
Yeah, I think it's really important for folks to understand that this new regulation is different than previous ones, and it does impact every vehicle that operates in the state of California, not just those vehicles that are domiciled or registered here. And that's a big difference. That said, so any vehicle that does or will enter the state of California needs to be registered in the trucker system, and you need to be planning for your transition. Now, if these are truly kind of interstate operating vehicles that are sleeper cabs, you know, CARB is aware that these vehicles are not going to be electrified in the near term. That's why under the milestone category, these are listed as kind of a 2030 initial target, with the expectation that there's going to be enough interstate ZEV infrastructure to support the vehicles at that point in time. If these are day cabs, kind of similarly, you'll have time to think through this and look at some of the retail charging and work on a plan that might make sense for your operations, or work with CARB. And I think if these are kind of really more located on the border of Arizona, on the border of Oregon, this is going to require thinking really carefully about the way that you do deliveries and operate in cross-border situations where these are not kind of big rigs, right? And it's something everyone does need to be aware of. But the goal under ACF is to find those vehicles that can be most easily electrified. So look for the vehicles that are best suited for the near term, and worry about those interstate operations later, unless those are kind of the entirety of your fleet, right? And then really think about those milestone groups and where they might fall in.
Perfect. Thank you. As far as our next question, this seems to be a popular one across all utilities. I've heard from multiple fleets that fleet owners and operators are being turned away from their utility in California for getting needed electricity to set up at a yard or depot. What would the reason for this be? And I can hop in here for SDG&E. In short, we really don't turn any customers away. We generally tend to ask customers to revise their plans. A lot of the times when we have a fleet owner or operator that approaches the utility, they might not have a fully vetted vehicle acquisition plan over the next several years. They might not have a really good understanding of what chargers they intend to install. And so we have a lot of those conversations with customers, and we'll request for them to make revisions, but very, very rarely would a customer actually be turned away. I think one of the biggest examples that we've continually seen is we have a lot of home businesses that will ask to participate in this program and have, let's just say, 1 to 2 DC fast chargers installed at a residential area. And it doesn't work for this program. So every situation will be unique, and we strongly advise that you connect with your utility in order to identify next steps and finalize those plans. So on to our next question. This one is going to be for Jason. Is there a one-stop shop for incentive money? This was something that you covered earlier, and it can be rather complex to go through. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, we can help with that with our some of our programs, like the grant writing assistance, helping customers to capture some of that incentive money for electric vehicles. And then, of course, through the utility programs themselves to build out the infrastructure. I don't know, Dean or Nick, if you have any other suggestions for capturing that money.
Did you want to go first?
No, go ahead.
Can you hear me? Did you want to go first? Oh, okay. Sorry. We do have quite a few conversations with our customers, and we tend to go through. We don't have essentially a one-stop shop, but we have a lot of additional resources that we can provide our customers in order to identify what funding is applicable for their particular fleet. So it's definitely a conversation worth having. And I know we're starting to get close to the end here, so I'm going to go ahead and this is going to be our last question for today. And this one is going to be for Rebecca. What will the penalties be for not complying with ACF? There's been quite a few questions surrounding this.
Yeah, I think the maximum legal penalty is $10,000 per vehicle per day for non-compliance. That is unlikely to be the actual penalty unless you flagrantly disregard the rule and just decide, heck with it, I'm not doing this. There's other kind of mitigating circumstances that CARB takes into account, but I think it is really important to understand that these penalties are serious. and that I have worked with fleets that have unfortunately received penalties of $100 per vehicle per day, $1,000 per vehicle per day, but that the legal max is $10,000.
Wow, that's quite a bit to go through. Thank you for going ahead and providing that. Let's see here. We'll go ahead and we will move into an additional question. How does ACF affect waste haulers and garbage truck fleets? And this one is going to go to Rebecca once again.
So ACF impacts garbage trucks the same way it impacts any other vehicles. So you're going to have and typically it would fall under, most refuse vehicles would fall under group 2, but there is a specific exemption for waste and wastewater fleet vehicles that are in the fleet as of January 1st of 2024, are already fueled exclusively by biomethane and support organic waste diversion or wastewater production already. Those vehicles would be eligible to be, those specific vehicles at those specific facilities are eligible to move to group 3 under the milestone version for compliance. Otherwise, all other waste vehicles probably fit within group 2. There may be some specific categories where they fall under group 3, but they are high priority fleets.
Perfect. Okay, and I'm going to squeeze in one last question, as this has popped up a few times into the chat. And then once again, this is going to be for Rebecca. How has CARB notified customers of these regulations?
I am so sorry, Nick. I couldn't hear that. Could you repeat that?
Sure. How has CARB notified customers of ACF regulations?
You know, CARB has done pretty significant outreach over the last multiple years. They've been developing this rule for 3+ years. They've been developing the OEM-specific sister rule. There have been workshops across the state. There have been emails and postcards and kind of anything and everything you can think of. And unfortunately, that doesn't mean that they've reached literally every single fleet operator within the state. And it is our responsibility as participants in this industry to help everybody kind of understand what the compliance reality is so we can all move forward together.
Perfect. Thank you. And we are just about time. Thank you, everyone, for staying over. Please be on the lookout for a follow-up email with the recording of the webinar next week. Slides from today's webinar will be available and sent to all webinar registrants. The recording will also be posted on the ACT News website. As a reminder, please fill out a quick 30-second survey that will pop up as we leave the webinar. So thank you so much again for joining us. Please enjoy the rest of your week and take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.